Hi, I'm David Kais, and I run R for the rest of us. You may think of R as a tool for complex statistical analysis, but it's much more than that. From data visualization to efficient reporting to improving your workflow, R can do it all. On this podcast, I talk with people about how they use R in unique and creative ways. I'm joined today by Clara Guibourg, who is a multilingual data journalist working at Swedish Public Radio, but who used to work at the BBC News, and by Nassos, Stylianou, a senior journalist at BBC News who specializes in data-driven journalism there. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for being with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
So I'm excited to talk to you. I came across your work specifically because you released a package called bbplot, which makes it possible, or which uses a custom theme within ggplot to make plots take on the BBC style. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. But before we do that, I'd like to know just kind of a bit about your background, specifically as it relates to R. So maybe Clara, if you don't mind starting, when did you start using R, and what changed for you when you made that switch to R?
Sure. So, I probably started using R around exactly around the same time that I started working at the BBC. So previously I'd been aware of it for a couple of years and kind of been meaning to teach myself. I'd been trying to teach myself, and I'd been doing a couple of, tutorials online, and that kind of typical thing where you do a tutorial and you follow it perfectly and you think, oh great, I'm great at this now, I can do anything, and then you try to do even the simplest thing on your own and you can't get it and you just kind of give up. But once I started at the BBC, I actually committed to it more fully, and basically, so that would be start of 2018. So yeah, I started then and basically never looked back. And I think that what helped me kind of get started with it then was that there was just a really, really supportive environment at the BBC for learning internally. There was, I had really helpful colleagues, and there was a lot of you really felt like you could take the time to kind of ask questions and learn new things.
And just out of curiosity, what tool or tools were you using primarily before you made that switch to R?
So I was working previously in Excel. I mean, it's basically spreadsheets. And in terms of visualizations, I would have been using chart tools, I guess. Largely.
What about for you, Nassos? When did you take up R, and how did that change the work that you were doing?
Yeah, I think I probably started kind of in a similar way to Clara, sort of using kind of Excel spreadsheets and sort of for mapping sort of tools like QGIS to visualize things. And then kind of at the BBC, as we started doing more kind of, as the team joined up with kind of data scientists and programmers, kind of the data journalists, the more sort of editorial journalist side of it, we started kind of seeing a bit kind of wider world out there really that was kind of using R, using Python, using these things, and working really closely with a developer who was at the BBC at the time, whose background was kind of back-end development, and he was using R for a lot of the data projects we would do. So it would kind of be any task that was too kind of onerous for Excel would kind of go to him. And he, as you can imagine, he was very popular within the team. And kind of sitting next to him and kind of getting a feel for the work he would do, I slowly sort of started learning R, of him, and kind of Stack Overflow, really, I would say. And I think it was a kind of a slow, it's kind of a weird process. It was really, really quick at first. It was kind of, oh, this is amazing. And then probably kind of a few months of feeling I have literally made no progress. I'm kind of doing the same things over and over again until you kind of discover functions and you discover kind of a few other things. And then you look back and say, God, I can't imagine doing this manually that I used to do. And then you kind of realize, yeah, I have kind of progressed really rapidly. But I think it started off from my side very much analysis. Kind of, I want to do more involved and more and heavier and work with bigger data sets. Kind of use it for programming and analysis purposes, and the visualization came after that.
Interesting. So what was it that led you to realize, oh, we should use this not just for analysis, but also for the visualization pieces?
Um, Workflow issues, I guess. You just kind of we'd um we'd come to a stage where kind of, I guess this might be the disadvantage in a way of a larger team, in that there are kind of like at the BBC we had sort of designers who would work on graphics, and we would get a certain distance in R and like working, like analyzing data and then exploring it using ggplots and using the sort of custom themes, and then we would sort of work with a designer or someone who's kind of a bit more specialist on the design side of things and export something for them, and then they would kind of make it sing really and work on it. But that is just kind of a very time consuming workflow. If you think how many kind of basic charts or how many visualizations you wanted, like the BBC does, especially another thing to bear in mind with the BBC is kind of there's 40 odd World Service languages as well, who also kind of reversion things. So you wouldn't really want, kind of thinking back, it was kind of workflow issues that were like, there has to be a better way rather than us working in our, doing the analysis, doing the visualizations as kind of exploratory data visualizations, exporting as a PDF, then getting it to someone in Illustrator who would then spend time cleaning that up. So it was kind of that final bit of the workflow that we were kind of, you know what, could this be done in R altogether? And it was kind of more of an exploration. And I guess that's around the time sort of Clara came in and we started sort of properly looking into how far can we go with getting templates, making all this stuff that we're doing production ready just in R.
Yeah. How many kind of folks were there on your team who were at that point? It sounds like you were both kind of like getting into R at the same time. How many other folks were there who were doing that as well?
Trying to think back. Probably around five of us, I would say, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say that most of the data team was already using R for analysis. So it was kind of a question of a few of us being a handful of us, probably that were kind of curious about trying to solve these problems that Nassos was talking about, of trying to kind of figure out a way of getting kind of overcoming these like individual little obstacles that we had in order to get like production ready graphics, kind of from start to finish in R.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm just curious because I don't, as an outsider, I hear BBC and I think, thousands of people, but obviously it's going to be a small team who's doing that one particular piece.
Yeah. I think there was a couple of people who knew R really well, but again, from the data science side, from the back end side, nobody came into the team kind of at that time being a specialist in ggplot that then moved us on. It was kind of, we were all kind of learning together and kind of researching together and adding components together, and like, how far can we go with this? It was kind of a collaboration where we were all at a similar level really, but then each person might have kind of find an answer to, here's how we make the footer kind of left align, and kind of really kind of very specific things like that were kind of, it's crazy how important they were at the time.
Yeah, but
yeah, it was like, if you're going to generate like hundreds of graphics, you want the footer to always be the same proportion, and you want the BBC logo, the blocks, to always be in exactly the same place.
I remember long discussions about the exact, should the font be, should it be 9 or 10 spaces about. I definitely agree with that. But I think that it was a real, it was a really big benefit for is that it was just kind of an exploration where we were, like you say, not just that we were kind of learning together and kind of just trying things out. I think that kind of collaborative and kind of experimental approach really was why I think that kind of like brought the group's level, like our knowledge forward faster than it would have done otherwise, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
how did you, I mean, you've talked about how you were all kind of like exploring R at the beginning. How did you get from that point to the point where you realized, hey, we could actually, take what we've learned and make a custom theme and create this package? Do you remember kind of, was there a light bulb moment, or how did that come about?
I don't think that there was a light. I mean, correct me if you disagree, Nassos, but I would say that it was such a it was just kind of like a constantly evolving thing. Like it started out at the point where we would just start with, firstly just playing around with ggplot, trying out, how can we get the right font for it to look like a BBC chart, and then kind of the next obstacle, which was, how can we get the BBC logo to all of our charts? How can we export them with a little horizontal line that needs to go across the footer of all the charts? Things like that. And then once we kind of developed like functions that worked for this, trying to work out how do you actually create a package that was like the next step, which I don't think that any of it was kind of like, oh, this is like this one big light bulb moment when we brought it forward. It was just kind of constantly making little fixes and taking the next step.
Yeah, definitely. I guess an important thing to bear in mind sort of is that the starting point was not how can we make a BBC chart package. The starting point was, I think the starting point was literally, can we make a production ready graphic that does not need to go, it does not need any modifications, that can go straight from R onto the BBC website. That was the starting point. And then I think, I would agree with Clara. It wasn't a light bulb moment, but the more of those we ended up doing and publishing on the site, the more we're like, hey, what about, packaging this up and kind of sharing it even more widely outside of the five of us? And I guess even before the step where it's a package that you can sort of download and use yourself, there was a stage where the kind of big ambition, the thought was like, how can we actually get other people in the BBC using it? And then kind of that aren't kind of super experts in R or don't use it day to day and might know a little bit. So that was the other internal thing going on, is how can we get other people outside of the team to use it?
That makes sense. And so you talked a bit just now about how creating this custom theme and putting it in a package allowed you to create graphics directly from R and put them straight onto the BBC website. You touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you can talk in a bit more depth about what that process was like prior to having the custom theme. You talked about how you worked with a design team to finish the graphs. So can you walk me through step by step so we can kind of get the contrast of what it looked like prior to having this theme?
Sure. Before we had this theme, and before we kind of were working with ggplot for visualization, we basically had two options for graphics. We could either use there is, I presume, there is an in-house chart tool, which you could use for kind of quick turnaround things. Basically just very easy to use, very kind of rigid, and doesn't really offer any flexibility in terms of what you could, you get your input your data and you get a line chart that looks just so. The other option would be to, if there's something that you have a little bit more time with, would be to kind of work together with the designers on our team. So that sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay,
fine.
sorry. It's just it sounded like everything Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. No. So basically, the other option was would be to order to work together with designers on something, which obviously means kind of it's something that takes longer time. So it only really be used for sort of longer term things.
Yeah, and so that in that case, you would make something in Excel, I'm assuming, and then have to do a bunch of back and forth with the designer. Is that how it would typically work, or was it a different
Yeah.
process?
Something. I mean, basically, either yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was either kind of, yeah, I guess it was either export a PDF from here's how we want it to look, or an SVG with kind of the standard ggplot stuff, either something in Excel, either something in the chart tool saying, here's the base of it. Can we add stuff onto that? Can we, add a line for a forecast, make the sort of side of it, half of it gray? Can we do this thing, which wasn't in the standard chart tool, was a little harder? Can we add an annotation? Can we add an arrow pointing to? So anything that was additional, which is kind of, it sounds, you've got a chart tool, you've got ways to do it. But I think a lot of these little additions, like an annotation, are fundamental to kind of storytelling, really. So
right.
whilst they feel like, extras, for us, we kind of really wanted to get there to have a way to get there. And I think, what's also important in terms of kind of thinking of the wider BBC and the sort of design team is that it wasn't really a fun job for a designer to get a brief that was, can you kind of recreate this, or can you add something like this, as opposed to them really putting their creative skills to kind of infographics, to kind of UX, to design pages, to kind of do much more creative stuff than slightly monotonous sort of like reversioning a graphic that's almost there, but not quite, from a
Right.
data journalist, right? So it kind of helped benefit both sides. It freed up, and it has freed up designers to do kind of much more creative and much more illustrative stuff, as opposed to
Huh.
kind of recreating charts all day, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's really interesting. I've never thought about that as a benefit in an organization like yours. And I don't know if for me, being able to create everything in ggplot actually makes me more creative, I feel like, because I can, as opposed to having to like sit down and think, okay, I want this here, let's try this here. But then you get it back from the designer. I imagine there were
Yeah,
times and you're like, oh, that isn't
yeah,
quite what I wanted. So, but then you feel bad if you keep asking them to redo it. Whereas if you can do it all in ggplot, you can explore, okay, let me try, making the gray slightly lighter, or, whatever the thing is. It probably allows you to do more creative things on your end because you don't have to constantly go back
Yeah,
and forth
definitely.
with
it
people.
was exactly that. Yeah, I can't imagine that designers were. No, I'm sure that designers are much happier since, as opposed to us standing over their shoulder, kind of moving things around. Like, whereas,
Right.
yeah, that is, I guess, 80% of making a chart in Guibourg, right? Moving things
Definitely.
around until you get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this because I definitely found it like immediately addictive when I started working with ggplot to make charts. Like even before we got anywhere near having a production ready chart, just kind of trying things out, visualizing things for the first time. And I was trying to work out why that was, and I think it is that you were saying that like you can make like the simplest chart, which is like a couple of lines of code, and you've got something that's just there, and then you realize that like the possibilities to tweak this are limitless. Like I can do anything now. And you can go as in depth as you want, instead of moving the tiniest things around, and just just completely flexible in a way that was just completely new to me. Coming from having worked with chart tool basically previously to visualize things.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So one last question before we dig into the code. Nassos, you talked about how, obviously the BBC has the BBC World Service and they're or produced in different languages. Do you do anything now where like are charts produced in different languages at all? In other words, for example, can you like make a chart in R in English and then iterate to make versions in different languages? Is that a thing at all?
Yeah. Yeah, charts in Russian, charts in a few other languages. We also had kind of, a hurricane map making kind of script. Didn't quite make it to package that we could also sort of do into different languages. So it would take the data based on kind of which side of the world the hurricane was from, and kind of it needed a lot of dedication from World Service language colleagues whose
Sure.
lives was made significantly easier by, again, it's kind of that reversioning process that we're talking about, but on their end to kind of get a graphic done from English into 30 languages. So we did kind of two things to make that happen. One, it was a lot of experimentation with kind of Unicode and character sets and all that in that a lot of the like kind of went over my head, but was perfectly understood by people who kind of have these issues with character sets every day. So a lot of World Service language colleagues that were interested in data and graphics kind of took a lot of that on. And then the second bit was kind of trying to, for example, the Russian service or kind of other colleagues in the Americas hub, which is kind of does graphics and visualizations for BBC Mundo and BBC, which sort of the Spanish version and Brazilian as well. So also kind of part of the tools and the tutorials and everything that we developed, we also used it as an opportunity to that they joined. We put together a sort of course that was kind of how they could get to a stage in R where they can make graphics. So it kind of worked also. Yeah, part of the work that we've done was also to kind of try and skill people up in R, as well as that next step into using it for graphics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'll actually at the very end, I'll ask you briefly about kind of this spurring interest and that kind of thing. I mean, what I imagine in my head is you have code that creates a graphic, and then you have, maybe it isn't this automated, but you have like an internal function that's like translate to every single language. And that, I mean, I'm sure it isn't this automated. And then it like spits out 30 graphs, of the same thing translated into various languages.
So
again, it's probably not that automated,
not
but
quite. But the main issue with that is, and it's kind of a super basic issue in that translations in other languages are just significantly longer in a lot of languages than English.
Interesting.
So when we tried playing around with automation on that, we found that, like, say you have a sentence in Russian or in Arabic, you still need to kind of move it along. So it's not as if there's a person for each language that knows R and knows ggplot and can use the package that could then take it and make those modifications. We have a similar tool, just that you say, but in Photoshop for reversioning graphics like that. So a lot of the automation was handled by Photoshop and by other tools that we have for generally reversioning graphics, as opposed to doing it in R. But some specialist journalists in the World Service team have used it to kind of make graphics straight from R in their own language, as opposed to having another layer of automation that translates it's English directly from R. We have other ways of kind of directly translating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's not super related actually to the main topic, but I was just, when you brought that up, it made my mind expand and start thinking about that. All right, cool. Let me put up my screen now, and I'm going to kind of walk through the code. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of walk through some sample code, and I'm going to ask you some questions. I basically have this just making like a very simple graph. Then I apply the BBC style, and then I actually copied the code from GitHub. And so I just kind of want to like walk through it step by step, so you can kind of explain like what's happening in the different pieces of it. So yeah, let me go ahead and just run these lines here. And I just made, this is some code I had from something. I don't even
What are we
remember
looking
now.
at?
Just it's something about penguins. I always use the Palmer penguins data set just for teaching. Very simple. It's what is it? The percent of all these penguins. So the penguins data set just has observations taken of different penguins on 3 different islands. And so, yeah, I think I just counted how many penguins there are in each island and just got a percent of for those islands of the total observations. So just made a very, very simple graph. This is obviously with no theme applied. And then using the BBC style function, let me go ahead and run that so people can see the contrast. So before I actually walk through the code, can you just at a very broad level talk about what are some of the main things that the BBC style function does?
I mean, one of the main things it does is that it strips out a lot of the first thing that jumps out at me is that it strips out a lot of the kind of like the panel background and just sets everything to like a white and clean background. That's the main thing. And then of course it sets the other thing that's kind of immediately obvious is that it changes the fonts of all of the text elements. So you don't have any title or subtitle at the moment, but if you did, that would have changed as well.
So I'll add a title just so people can see. Gotcha.
Yeah, the more the kind of thinking back to it, sort of ahead of talking, the more kind of, my God, this is like extremely basic. That's kind of what I realized, which is like at the time it felt like this is like incredible innovation, but thinking about it now, it's like it doesn't really do much, does it? But yeah, I guess what it does in a way is well, another thing that I realized is some of the things that it did at the time, and even in kind of what 3-4 years, is kind of now a part of ggplot. Like left aligning the title at the time was like you couldn't do that, and adding kind of, and the footer that we were adding to it, we had to work with like kind of going to the internals and add grobs and things like that, which now you can kind of do so much easier. So I guess there's also kind of so much more you can do out of the box now, as opposed to have to go in and write functions to get that
Right.
title kind of left aligned, which was another sort of thing that took
Oh, we spent
days of
so
our
long
time
on
and
that,
kind of
trying to figure it out. If only we'd waited a
and
little
then the new
bit
version of ggplot, like
for that update.
yeah, 2 years, it's like everything's there. We're like, should we amend everything? It's like, no, let's just keep it, given the
Yeah.
effort that's gone into it.
Yeah. Well, Nassos, I said to Clara before you jumped on that the fact that it's simple is actually one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because my book is really pitched to either people who have just like are beginners with R, or people who have never used R. So having a simple theme actually is good in my
Yeah.
eyes.
I think like one of the things that it does, although it's kind of looks like fine, you could manually do that, but I think it's important in a way because you see so many ggplot graphics, or definitely at the time you used to see so many in kind of a lot of science journals or stats journals, that like the fonts and the numbers are just so small. And like it's the simplest thing just to up the level of the font and not
Right.
and kind of, but at the same time, if you think that this was kind of just as everything was happening on mobile, and you see one of these graphics on a kind of tiny mobile screen, you couldn't read anything really. So kind of just getting quickly out of the box onto a size of font that could be like really read if it's embedded, if it's kind of put into a page on the BBC and it's either online or on the BBC News app, that you could kind of really clearly read everything on a mobile screen, was kind of important, much more important at the time than it feels it should have been. But it was kind of a really big thing rather than the very small font sizes that ggplot gives you out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, actually, I'll get into that in a second. It's funny. The other thing, so my brother who doesn't do any data, he runs his own business, but nothing related to data, but he pays attention to kind of like political journalism and just sees people making data visualization, and he can recognize ggplot just by that ugly gray background. The default theme is it's so ubiquitous because
Yeah.
so many people just don't take the effort to
Yeah.
make even the smallest change. So let me actually do this. Let me just copy this into a new code chunk. So to take kind of what you've done here, let me, before we actually get into it, just to show people, like we could just copy, did I do that correctly? Yeah. All of that. Let me just copy this as well. So the BBC theme is just starting here on line 75. All of these things that make kind of individually minor tweaks to the
Yeah.
using the theme function, and we end up with the exact same thing. So let's talk through a few of these things. You talked first about the font size. Can you talk about kind of places where you do that and how you do that specifically?
Sorry, Dan, could you explain what you mean? I'm not really sure on the question.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. Sure, sure. So you talked about, one of the main things that you wanted to do was
Yeah.
increase the font size, right? Like this as opposed to this with all the smaller fonts. So can you just kind of talk about, for example, I see,
Yeah.
here with
Yeah.
like plot title or subtitle or legend text. Can you just maybe give a couple examples of places where you adjusted the
Yeah,
font size to
absolutely.
make
So
it
you
more
can see a
readable?
couple of them right at the top there. Like you said, we set the plot title, font and size first, and the plot subtitle, and all of these individual elements were kind of something that we had to discuss each one with the designers on our team as well. So we could have to have talks about exactly what's um, obviously what font size should it be, but also should the margin should it be 8 or 9 on the bottom, things like that. So all of these have kind of been settled on after going through with the designers to see what worked best in production. So we set the larger font size there with the title and the subtitle. You can see it again a little bit further down in legend text. You can see that we've set a larger size, and again in the axis text a little bit further on as well. We set a larger size.
Yeah, I think the other thing is where we've kind of removed text as well. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but like we kind of didn't really want an axis title either side because it was like you get those, but if you've got a subtitle and a title, why would you need to again explain what the axis is? It's kind of like the title and subtitle should kind of do all of that. So we removed the text from and also the kind of vertical sort of axis text is really hard to read on the one side, and
Yeah.
then you lose a lot of chart real estate with that's a weird thing to say, chart real estate. Yeah. Anyway, with kind of it having an x-axis title, so we removed that, and that allows you to sort of bump up the size of the axis labels as opposed to kind of squinting to see what does the axis represent, and rather than kind of trying to read a few different, I guess it's kind of like chart hierarchy, kind of rather than trying to read too many things like the x-axis title and the y-axis title, you've only got to read the title, the subtitle, and then the numbers should be big enough so that it kind of all makes sense. So the simplicity
Yeah.
is in line with kind of removing,
I think the
stripping stuff
benefit of
out as
that,
well.
sorry if I can just
Well, and I think
add just one
instead
thing
I
to what
was,
Nassos was saying, is
yeah,
that
yeah, sorry, go.
I think the benefit of that is that it kind of nudges people it kind of forces you to think more about the title and the subtitle, which are so important, to kind of make sure that you're telling the full story with those, rather than just having uninformative
Yeah,
uninformative text there. So we're kind of
right.
trying to, but with the default options and
Yeah,
in this theme, we're trying to kind of nudge people to tell as good a story as possible with the title and subtitle.
yeah. So I just took, this is, you all made, in addition to the package, you made a kind of cookbook to help people see some of these things in action. So I just found one that would do this, where you have a nice subtitle here that explains exactly what's on the y-axis here, so people can understand that without having to have life expectancy
Yeah.
written sideways and have
Yeah.
people turning their heads.
Yeah,
Which makes a
exactly.
ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think again, like there's nothing as well. Kind of the beauty of it is that there's nothing stopping you from, and the thing that comes out later in the cookbook is that you can change all this, but you can just add layers back onto the theme that will overwrite anything that has happened in the BBC style function. So that's the way we thought about it, because I think sort of one of the things that you had asked in kind of your question sort of before was kind of, it is in a way kind of inflexible, right? It just does some very basic things. We don't have 5 different functions, for example, like BBC style vertical bar chart, BBC style horizontal bar chart, BBC style line chart, or kind of a lot of the other themes at the time, which was one of the things that we saw and just kind of didn't really work for us. They gave you colors that matched kind of, I think there was like an Economist, a Financial Times, or a 538 theme. I don't think they were official themes that the publications themselves had done, but other people had kind of say, let's kind of, if you want to do a graphic in the Economist style, you can use this theme. So they gave you the colors for each line as kind of colors the Economist would use, but we kind of didn't want that, because then it's kind of, if you've got a function for every little thing or every type of chart, then you're not really learning on how to adapt and how to add things onto the theme and how to remove things. So this kind of remained it's kind of a basic skin on as a starting point, and then you can layer stuff on, which I guess goes to the concept of ggplot in general, that you're layering stuff on. But that's kind of how we wanted the theme to be, that you can, if you don't want even something super simple, like there's 2 types of, like a horizontal bar chart and a vertical bar chart, and you need to change the grid lines if you're doing one or the other. And we can even kind of make that into a function, because if you wanted to do that, you could learn how to go through the theme and change that, and then get used to going back into the cookbook, changing stuff. So yeah, that's kind of
I mean, I totally agree with that.
That's interesting, because
I mean, that was like kind of very few things about our work with the bbplot package were like really intentional from the start. A lot of it was kind of just exploration, like we've been saying before. But one of the things that we did really talk about early on was that we didn't want it to be another. I mean, we had a chart tool already. We didn't want it to be another chart tool, and we wanted to keep it as simple as possible to really make use of, I mean, the flexibility that is like that is, the main benefit of ggplot. So I think that was really important.
that's interesting. I mean, I guess I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just thinking about, like, in contrast, I don't know if you all are familiar with HRBR themes and theme ipsum. So that theme gives you, I don't even know how many arguments. And I was thinking about that as a very different approach. I mean, obviously these all have defaults, and so you can just run theme ipsum. But for you, the way, and the reason I said you don't have flexibility, I guess I was meaning it probably too narrowly. I meant it in this context, like you don't provide arguments for people. Instead, it sounds like the way you provide that flexibility is you encourage people to learn the fundamentals and be able to do things, like this to add on, access titles or whatever through their adding additional lines as opposed to
Yeah,
arguments within the
definitely. I
BB
mean,
style theme.
I
Yeah.
mean, we Nassos was saying that this is all very simple, and that's very true. But it was kind of by design, like because um, all that this um, all that BBC style should do is just literally just the things that you need for every chart that you're making. You want to set the right fonts, you want to strip out the backgrounds,
Yeah,
and then everything else you should kind of be free to play around with each individual chart. And we want to keep that separate.
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I
Yeah,
mean, we've since kind of internally got a few functions that, tighten up like the space on the left-hand side, things like that, which basically if you're finding I'm literally having to do this every single time, then
right.
that's kind
Yeah.
of a pretty obvious call that you should have a function that does it. So we have kind of done a few of those, or kind of to change the grid lines, we've got a shorthand rather than kind of, needing to do that. But when we first started out, this was, I think this was the whole point. And I guess in a way, repetition kind of really helped. So the more times you have to like find out how to change the margin of a theme rather than have a function do it for you, initially was good. But for someone coming to our kind of another way where they know all about functions and programming, then the way we approached it would seem kind of terrible. But for us, it kind of really worked to help us get more used to kind of ggplot, the arguments, what the theme does. And it also helped us teach other people within the team because we started slowly and you could
Yeah,
explain this is what this line does, as opposed to just run BBC bar chart and you should get there sort of
right,
thing.
right. Let's talk about it. Even though it's different now. Wait, where is the part of it that left aligns your title?
Yeah.
That's in finalized plot, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Never mind. You're right. You're right. So I was telling Clara before you got on Nassos that I'm actually, I really like that function. It's really cool, but I want to
Yeah.
keep the focus on this. So, I take that back. Let's actually not talk about this
Okay.
or talk about that portion of it. Is there any other kind of piece of the, I mean, for my book, I'll probably walk through this like a bit, even a bit in a bit more detail, line by line, but anything else like that you want to kind of highlight, on this custom theme?
I think the cookbook was kind of as important, I think, for us, in terms of kind of here's a repository of all this information and people could add their new chart styles to, people could add tips and tricks to, and it has been kind of over the years kind of added to again, sort of internally as well in the, and new joiners kind of straight away have something. And we've had kind of a few new people joining over the years. It's kind of like, okay, so I think someone recently, it's kind of, very much a Python person, but because of the cookbook and because of the package could really quickly sort of come into, despite kind of being, mainly, um, um, Python, literate, they could kind of within week 2 of being at the BBC, given that they knew how to code and everything was there, they could kind of produce graphics in R. And it just kind of having the cookbook there to talk through how this all works and why and what bit of code does what, rather than um, having to sit and explain it with someone,
Yeah, I think that's totally
really
right.
helped, I think.
And I think that it was a
Yeah,
really
'cause I know
useful way of sharing information internally to kind of feel like everybody was kind of adding in their own. It was kind of, the idea was that and it did actually kind of grow organically. The more people that kind of started using R and kind of started adding their own little kind of tips and tricks that they discovered along the way, and like everybody was contributing to it.
Yeah, because I know you've written that having both the theme as well as the cookbook really kind of spurred additional interest in art. I think those are kind of giving people that ownership and letting people um, contribute. It seems like it would really help with that, as well as, of course, like you said, giving people something to start with and some examples that they can use when they're getting started. Um, Last question is if you have any advice for people, say someone is at an organization and they're thinking, oh, I should make a custom theme for my organization. Any advice on how to do that, both from a code perspective as well as from a kind of
I mean,
organizational
I
perspective?
guess the thing that I would have to say based on my experiences is to kind of see the value of and not be afraid to kind of experiment and just kind of not to be afraid to just sort of try things out, and that it's okay if you don't have like a huge plan from day one with everything set in stone and thinking, okay, so I'm gonna do all these things, I'm gonna make this package. You can kind of just start by just being curious, just having this one little problem that you have to solve, and going, oh, okay, I figured that out. What would be the next step to kind of improve upon this? And then one day, maybe you go on from there. You solve the knife problem. One day, you realize that you have a custom theme set. Um, doesn't it doesn't need to be more complicated than that.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of, I guess the first question would be kind of to anyone thinking about it is, do you have a need for it rather than start like, and yeah, exactly as Clara said. So we didn't start with, let's make a package. It just built onto that. So it's kind of break things down into, here's what I want to do and here's what would benefit my organization, and do that rather than start off with the solution is I want to write a package or I want to do a theme, or it's kind of, I guess, what do you actually want to do, want to produce? What do you want your output to be? Because your output isn't, unless kind of you're in software development, your output isn't, I want to do a package. So what
Right.
is your output? And then find building blocks that would kind of provide a solution to that, really. And yeah, I get from my experience is like, keep it super simple. I think what we kind of ended up doing was having lots of people in a weird way. This helped other parts of our kind of skill set development as well, in that it was probably the first time we were you as a sort of team, well, I guess 2018 sort of thing, using GitHub and kind of in a way that everyone was pushing to kind of the same GitHub repo and doing changes and commenting, and it kind of really, really helped having loads of people working on one thing collaboratively to kind of really, it was never a task for like one person go out and build a package, and then by little things that everyone added, we also kind of work better collaboratively, work better in terms of documentation, work better, kind of really learn sort of GitHub pull requests and all that stuff a little better. So it benefited a lot of things in parallel.
Uh,
Yeah.
that makes a ton of sense. Great. Well, is there anything I didn't ask you about the theme or the process or anything like that that you think would be useful for folks to know?
I don't think so. Nothing I can think of.
No, I guess like, no, I guess like, I don't know how like interesting it is to you, but a lot of the coronavirus kind of lookup pages that we've been running run off kind of R and produce graphics. I can send you a link to them, but it's kind of
Yeah.
this whole process of like plugging in data, getting the data and using the package to produce graphics has kind of lived on to a massive degree even since then, and continues. Like it's not something that we developed, we released, and we let go. It's kind of, we've used it. I don't think there's been a day where someone at the BBC hasn't used the package to produce a
Wow.
graphic, I don't think. And definitely over the last sort of 2 years where we've been sort of running coronavirus graphics sort of every day, really. And it was only we can only do it in this way because of how kind of one step of it, which is building something as a custom made BBC theme using R, is no longer something we think about. It's something that just happens because it's all there.
Yeah.
So I think that I don't think it's too big a statement to say that there's not been a day gone sort of that someone hasn't produced. Yeah, I think that is probably true over the last 2-3 years, definitely. So it has become kind of a fundamental part of the BBC data journalism team's output, really.
Yeah.
And the other thing is how many other people outside of the strictly data journalism team have taken to use it as well. I think that's a really, if I guess if we'd be proud as a team of anything, it's that, from my point of view, is how it has basically, if you tell someone, like, would you like to learn R? Everyone would say yes. Then kind of how many people get lost along the journey because
Sure.
there is no, why am I doing this in their mind? And what can I get out of it that is worth the pain? Because it is a
Right.
pain at first.
Yeah.
But showing someone or someone seeing, like someone from another team, it's like, you know what, this graphic that a few kind of months ago you would have to do in this old process, if you learn a few things or kind of devote a bit of time a day, here's the 5 lines of code that you can run and you can do that, and you don't need help you can do it yourself. It's kind of all contained within this. So I think that kind of spurred a lot of people outside kind of the data journalism team itself to take a real interest and kind of continue to keep on going, because there is that, here's what I will produce at the end of it, graphic. And you can see kind of the code, and here's like 6 lines of code. You can do that. Obviously they slowly learned that the tricky bit is kind of the bits in between, which is like, how do I get my data to a stage to put into that graphic? And then it's like, okay, I've done the graphic. How do I add all these layers onto it that make it sing? But yeah, still, it kind of really helps.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I was going to ask where folks can learn more about you. Obviously, folks can learn more about or see the package in action by going to the BBC website and seeing everything produced there. If they want to learn more about you and your work, where would be the places to go to do that?
Yeah, I guess the stuff that the data team does, we don't have a sort of page as a kind of data team page, but if anything sort of to learn about the package or the cookbook, we did a Medium post at the time, which talks about the process. So if there's anything that we might not have covered here that would be useful, or kind of a bit of a deep dive into the process and the code itself, they should be in that Medium post, as well as links to the GitHub and the cookbook. And in terms of kind of work, I guess, it's stuff that we do will show up across the BBC website.
Yeah. And I know, so just if they want to also find out more about you personally, Nassos, I know your website is Nassos,
Why would they do that?
Stylianou.com.
Yeah, sure. Twitter, although I don't use it too much recently. Twitter. I've got links to my website and the projects I've worked on, and I detail sort of, what work's been done in R for each project as well. So that might be useful to see from the projects especially I guess, if someone who's interested in learning R, sort of there is a little bit at the bottom of each section which says what I did and in what language. So
Okay. And then Clara, it looks like yours,
Yeah,
your
I
website
do have a
is
website as well. I've not been very good
claraguibourg.com.
at keeping it
Um,
updated, but
well,
I'll need to look into that. But yeah, it is there. I can see some examples.
well, it's
Pretty sure there are some links to with charts that use bbplot in there. And you can find me on Twitter as well. Also sort of
great.
semi-active.
Well, I'll make sure. Yeah, I'll include links to all those places so folks can find out more about you, the work you've done, and connect. Well, great. Well, thanks, Clara. Thanks, Nassos. I appreciate both of you spending some time with me today, and I
Thanks.
will be in touch soon.
Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something new about how you can use R. Do you know anyone else who might be interested in this episode? Please share it with them. If you're interested in learning R, check out R for the Rest of Us. We've got courses to help you no matter whether you're just starting out with R or you've got years of experience. Do you work for an organization that needs help communicating effectively with data? Check out our consulting services at rfortherestofus.com/consulting. We work with clients to make high-quality data visualization, beautiful reports made entirely with R, interactive maps, and much, much more. And before we go, one last request. Do you know anyone who's using R in a unique and creative way? We're always looking for new guests for the R for the Rest of Us podcast. If you know someone who would be a good guest, please email me at david@rfortherestofus.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.